Welcome to CSP 340, Chapter 7, Communication Disorders. We start today's presentation with a question. What is communication? Well, we communicate ideas. We communicate to put ourselves in relationships and to maintain those relationships. We control, we persuade, we create, we imagine. We communicate feelings. We even self-monitor by using self-talk. But don't be deceived, because communication is not just speech. It's verbal and it's nonverbal. So when you write, when you caress, when you sing song lyrics, when you shout, when you frown, movement, listening, psst, hey, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, even though the sound of it is something quite atrocious. If you say it loud enough, you always sound precocious. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, dum-da-dilly, dum-dum-die, and so on. So, when does communication become miscommunication? We're talking about communication disorders. We have to distinguish between a delay, a difference, and a disorder. So when we're talking about a language delay, what we're talking about is someone whose language sounds like that of a younger person. So their phonology, or how they make sounds, may sound like a younger person. So little children say granddaddy. They may also use shorter sentences, simpler vocabulary, or even childish vocabulary, like saying wah-wah for water, binky for blanket. All of those would be examples of immature or delayed speech. And then we have language differences. A lot of these are dialectical. So if you went up to New York, everybody would want to listen to you talk because of your fabulous Southern accent. But to you, it would sound like they were talking funny. But it even goes to vocabulary. When I lived in Alexander City, Alabama, they had a word that they used called bus left. They would say, "You better hurry up, boy, or you're going to get bus left." By that, they meant left by the bus. Never heard that word used anywhere else. But those differences are not disabilities. So when does a difference become a disability? So what we see is three different things. The first one is, does it interfere with the message? So does my communication style, do my communication skills interfere with what I'm trying to say to people? Secondly, does it call negative attention to me? So when I speak, are people distressed or disturbed by what I'm saying and how I'm saying it? Do they feel bad for me? Do they feel sorry for me? And then third, does it cause me emotional distress? A good example of this is the fabulous actor and beautiful voice of James Earl Jones. You know, he was Darth Vader in the Star Wars movies. He has a beautiful, beautiful tone to his voice. But he was a stutterer, and his stuttering was so significant that by the time he was in middle school, he chose to be mute. He was an elective mute. He did not speak for 2 or 3 years. And so in that case, it became a communication disorder because it led him to the point where he was so distressed that he wouldn't talk anymore. So next we're going to talk about the different kinds of speech disorders. There are articulation disorders, fluency disorders, and voice disorders. When we talk about articulation disorders, we use an acronym SOTA, and that means substitutions, omissions, distortions, and additions. So substitutions is where you substitute one sound for another, like saying wabbit. Omission is when you leave sounds off of words. So example of that would be in the South, how we are with word endings, like singing. Distortions is when you pronounce a word in a different way than other people pronounce it. So an example of that would be when little kids say Puschetti. And then additions is where you add sounds. Where I'm from in West Virginia, people will add the sound A at the beginning of verbs, like they will say, the boy was a-singing. So we're going to look at a video of a little girl and see if you can hear it.
How old are you, Elizabeth? 3. Elizabeth is going to tell us a story so that we can look at her speech and articulation skills within a connected speech sample. All right, Elizabeth, tell us your story.
Once upon a time, there was a little puppet named Pinocchio. His father painted him, and then the blue fairy come and changed him alive, and then Pinocchio nose growed, and then the blue fairy comes again and fixes his nose, and Jimmy Cricket said, "We're free." Then the fox said, "Up to the feather."
So when you first look at this young lady, you're thinking, well, she's just young, and so this is just immature speech. But as she continues to talk, you begin to have more and more trouble understanding her. And you can see by the expressions on her face that it's bothering her, because she can tell that people are not understanding her. You heard, if you listen carefully, substitutions, omissions, distortions, and additions. She was having trouble communicating her message. It would call attention to her in some settings, and you could tell it was beginning to distress her. And so that is not a speech delay, that is a speech disorder. The next one we're going to look at is a disorder of fluency, specifically stuttering. In this video, you'll just see some children stuttering. You've seen stutterers before, but it's interesting hearing these kids talk about themselves.
Stuttering is when my words get stuck, like I just did.
Stuttering is not something that you can help. It's something that just comes along with some people.
I get worried, like what other people might think if I do stutter.
Kids should ignore the people who tease them about stuttering because it's not their fault.
I worry about it when, like, I'm on S words, and they always get me stuck on stuff. On word, like, with an S at the beginning.
Help us help those who...
Used to be that stuttering was considered to be an emotional problem, that you would begin with stammering, which we all do, where we add us and hesitations in speech, and then because the person got upset with it, it would turn into a stutter. Actually, the research now indicates that it is a neurological problem, and that neurological problem causes the vocal cords to actually freeze up on certain sounds. Now, it is magnified when the person begins to become distressed about the attention that it's causing to them. Here are some risk factors for stuttering. First, if there's a family history of stuttering, it does run in families, so parents, siblings, other family members who stutter. Age of onset, typically after age 3.5, that only makes sense because you don't become fluent until after around age 3. So it's not going to be noticeable that you have a stutter until you're past the age where most people are speaking smoothly. If you've been stuttering for 6 to 12 months or longer, so in other words, when you're first beginning language, you may stutter a little bit. There may be times in your life for various reasons that you may stutter, but if it goes on for 6 to 12 months, then you probably are a stutterer. Most stutterers are male. It's not, you saw in the film, there are female stutterers, but it is much more common among males. And the people who stutter very often have problems with other things, such as speech sound errors, trouble being understood, and in fact even difficulty following directions. There is a connection between learning disabilities, by the way, and stuttering. So next we're going to look at speech disorders that are called voice disorders. And there are three categories. There are disorders of quality, disorders of pitch, and disorders of intensity. When we look at disorders of quality, we're talking about hoarseness, breathiness, and nasality. We talk about hoarseness, it's where somebody talks like this, where it sounds like they've got a sore throat. And the reason it sounds like they've got a sore throat is that typically they do have damage to their vocal cords. Now these may be nodules on their vocal cords, and if they are, they're typically because of strain on the voice. So for instance, cheerleaders and singers are both categories of people who end up with vocal cord damage. They call them nodules, and they have to do surgery to remove them. Kind of weird that I earlier used supercalifragilisticexpialidocious because the actress Julie Andrews, who was in that movie, ended up with nodules on her vocal cords and had surgery, and they weren't able to fix it. So she's not able to sing anymore. There are some very famous singers who have made a career out of hoarseness. Rod Stewart is a good example, that in his early years as a rock singer, he had a very hoarse voice. He later had surgery, and his voice is not nearly as hoarse sounding as it used to be. The next one is breathiness. Breathiness is where you talk right up in the top of your throat. You're not using your diaphragm. You're not even using much lung power. People who talk breathy, sometimes it's just an affectation. So, for instance, females in the South, hey, how are you? They just speak up in the top of their voice, not because they have to, because they want to. A famous singer for that, Olivia Newton-John, the song, Have You Ever Been Mellow? Right up there in the top of her voice. Breathiness sometimes, though, indicates that there are respiratory problems. People who have cerebral palsy very often have problems with breathiness. Nasality, there are two types. One is called hypernasality, and the other one is called hyponasality. Hypernasality is where you have a lot of twang in the voice. Good example of that would be Fran Drescher, the woman that played the nanny. A lot of country music is hypernasal. Hyponasality, down like this. If you hold your nose and talk, get down like this. This is hyponasality. People who have a cold have hyponasality. People who are deaf often have hyponasality because they can't hear how much vibration to put into their voice. Also, if your nasal passages are stuffed up because of sinus problems or blockage, for instance, if you have adenoid problems, that would lead to hyponasality. Next, we have disorders of pitch, high-pitched, low-pitched, monotone. So if you think of any man who talks in a very, very high voice or any woman who talks in a very low, low voice, then that can be an example of disorders of pitch or talking in a monotone. So when a person talks like this, Ben Stein, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, did a beautiful monotone. And then the last voice disorder is disorder of intensity. People talk way too loud or way too soft. That can be a sign of having a hearing disorder, although it's also very common among kids with attention deficit disorder. This ends part 1.